Welcome to our broadcast, brought to you by Fortra. I'm your host, Kenna Johnson from the Channel Company. Today we'll explore how organizations can achieve comprehensive cybersecurity coverage through Fortra's Alert Logic MDR, especially when facing challenges in resources and expertise. We'll delve into the core features and capabilities of Fortra's Alert Logic MDR. To discuss this further, I'm joined by Darren Gale from Fortra. Darren, thank you so much for joining me.
Pleasure.
Segment 1, Empowering Partners Addressing Cybersecurity Challenges. Threat actors are becoming more sophisticated. What are some of the risks partners and customers are facing?
I think in the last maybe 10 years, the landscape's transformed enormously. So if you look back in time a little, there were very discrete types of groups that were attacking organizations, from hero hacker through to the financially motivated groups, through to the intellectual property theft type groups and nation states and so on. And what's happened really in the last few years is a consolidation, if you like, in terms of the skills that we're observing within these threat groups, such that the demarcation between the defined threat groups is very diffuse now. And the net result is the capability of nation-state advanced persistent threat actors cascades very quickly now to financially motivated groups. And this creates a really significant challenge for defending organizations because clearly there is financial gain to be had from ransomware, from intellectual property theft and so on. And so the net result of that is that the adversary becomes increasingly sophisticated, using all sorts of modern techniques and what I would describe as multi-vector attacks. And they're very difficult to discover because they, by definition, pursue a variety of different methodologies to gain access. So it's a really, really big challenge that the industry is facing right now in terms of defending organizations, definitely.
How can partners better protect their customers and stay one step ahead?
I think every partner has a client base who's interested in cybersecurity will recognize the journey that those customers are on. The reality is that in the last, again, maybe 10 years or so, there's been a fundamental seismic shift. And that seismic shift has been organizations trying to do the very best they can with regard to cybersecurity. But the reality is the sophistication of the tools that you need to employ, the spread and depth of those tools that you need to employ, the availability of the skills to run those tools, it creates a very, very significant challenge for law firms, for construction companies, for manufacturers. And candidly, they want to be law firms and construction companies and manufacturers, not cybersecurity companies. And so I think these are some of the core contributing factors to why there is a very significant shift towards managed services. And for the partners that are listening to the webinar, I think the journey that you can go on as a trusted advisor to an organization to allow them to focus on their core business deliverables and to potentially hand off and transfer that risk to the partner and their service provider is a very compelling proposition. And it allows organizations who perhaps traditionally have been resellers, who want to have a closer relationship with the client, can move into that true trusted advisor status beyond advising on product, but actually advising on security posture with the managed service. Yeah.
Segment 2, the powerhouse behind Fortra's Alert Logic MDR. What is Fortra's Alert Logic MDR?
Alert Logic is a company that was acquired by Fortra. And so Fortra's Alert Logic is a managed service deliverable. And effectively, it sits, I would say, somewhere between the offering that an MSSP might have, which is where you have an organization run your tools for you, and somewhere along the spectrum towards where the customer is running their own deliverable. And it sort of sits somewhere in between. And it's essentially an outsourced SOC, an outsourced deliverable for the security operation function, really fulfilling upon the most painful aspect, I think, of security operations, which is the detection element and then driving the action in terms of keeping an organization secure. So most organizations that are considering outsourcing some part or all of their security capability will recognize the pain associated with specifically the detection piece. And so MDR is managed detection and response. And actually, Fortra's AlertLogic was the first mover in this space. And we've been delivering this kind of capability for a decade. And we have many thousands of customers. It's a really wonderful deliverable that organizations benefit enormously from.
What makes Fortra the brand stand out in the field of MDR services?
Fortra's AlertLogic is really differentiated in, I would say, in a number of different areas. So the first one is the experience that we have. Many thousands of customers over a decade of delivering value. Organizations who are interested in the type of value that we bring can look at any of the public sites like Gartner Peer Insights or G2 and see these incredible references that customers give us and endorsements. And that comes from this wealth of experience that we've got. Additionally, in this managed detection and response space, there are a lot of choices for our partners to potentially engage with, but many of them will require organizations to buy specific proprietary tools would then be run as part of the MDR service. And so we see this a lot with, for example, some of the endpoint vendors. You have to go and buy that endpoint in order to get that service. And that's certainly not the approach for AlertLogic. We will consume value from the tools that you already have, and where you don't have tools in place, then we actually provide those tools as part of the service. So that's a very, very compelling capability. The third area is the heterogeneous support. So customers have made investments in tools. Every customer has made investment in tools. And so they want to see ongoing value from those investments. And so Fortra's AlertLogic has a very great track record of consuming the output of many of those tools. And I think we consume from 95 different technology vendors today, upon which we can then deliver value back to the organization. The other area that I would highlight for the partners is that we're a channel-centric company, right? We love the channel. Everyone that you will work with regard to Fortra and AlertLogic is very tuned into the channel model. And in fact, the channel has been instrumental in our success historically. So we are very, very focused on making sure that the channel partners have a great experience with us, and that the margin profile for those transactions is very, very attractive. And then lastly, I would say the other area of differentiation is on wraparound services. So what we tend to promote is that our partners have the opportunity to provide wraparound services on top of the MDR for the client, including things like architectural services, incident response, and surge type capability, and so on. And this is very different to most of the other MDR vendors that are out there that want those services for themselves. And so to optimize margin profile for any partner looking to go to market with an MDR vendor, I think that model is really great because we provide the core service, they provide the wraparound service, and the customer gets a great experience. The partner is further injected into the customer ecosystem in terms of value, and everybody's a winner.
How does Fortra's AlertLogic MDR address the evolving challenges organizations face in maintaining visibility across diverse environments?
Every single customer that we engage with has a unique environment. That's the nature of what we're dealing with. They have made unique decisions on tool stacks. They've got unique architectures in terms of infrastructure, geographical distribution, industries that they work in. And so every customer is different, and every customer wants to feel special. So I think one of the things that we've done a really amazing job on, and again, I sort of point back to the external reference points on this that the partners can go and take a look at, is we do a really good job of making sure that regardless of whether the customer is a cloud native customer, a hybrid customer, legacy sort of on-premise customer, regardless of whether they are already consuming managed services in other areas or this is their first experience, they have a great experience with Fortra's AlertLogic. And I think that's a very important message for the partners because they want to be confident that when they bring their unique customer to us, the customer is going to have a great experience. And so I think we've got the evidence to suggest that we do that exactly.
Can you elaborate on how Fortra's AlertLogic MDR ensures security for organizations operating in cloud, hybrid, and on-prem environments?
The landscape's changing, right? Historically, when there used to be a kind of a bastion castle wall style security model around a finite set of on-premise pieces of infrastructure, the security landscape was different, and the pressures that defending organizations were facing were different in that respect. What's happened, of course, is that there's been a gradual migration and adoption of cloud infrastructure, and some organizations have ultimately become cloud native. Not many, I'll say, but there are some examples. But it's very important that whoever's providing the managed security capability into that organization is agile and can go on the journey with that client. Yeah, the way in which we're architected is to service all of those scenarios, actually, and I think that that's a very compelling proposition for the partners. So that as we deliver value to the organization, as we find evidence of bad in their environment, as we give them guidance around optimization of their security posture, the partner can work with us and alongside us in terms of the evolution of the customer's environment from, let's say, legacy on-premise to hybrid to cloud, to adopting different SaaS services and so on. But confident that whatever choice the customer is making, there's an opportunity for the managed SOC to deliver value around that stack that the customer is going to adopt.
In what ways does it assist organizations in handling pre- and post-breach concerns?
The reality is it's very dynamic with the client, yeah? The point at which a customer would adopt a managed service, like a managed SOC service, there may or may not be a historical experience of a breach event, yeah? And so it's very important that we deliver value in the absence of a breach event or in the absence of that experience. And the way that we do that is with architectural discussions, with configuration discussions, trying to get the organization to optimize their security posture and make appropriate changes that hardens their environment and makes them resistant to attack, elevating their existing posture, if you like. But then, of course, the core deliverable of the service is to detect the evidence of bad. And I think there's every probability that an organization will experience a breach event at some point. And so in that landscape, the key thing is that there's detection efficacy, so we do a great job of finding the bad. There's a very strong SLA in terms of the delivery of the notification. And in fact, AlertLogic has the industry-leading SLA on notification. And then not only there's notification, but there's then also the opportunity to take action. Yeah, and there's a degree of automation, so you can isolate things, you can kill processes on a host, or you can provide the notification to the organization in such a way that if the client desires for a human decision to be made, which is often the case, the information that's being provided is provided to the right person at the right time with the right support, and indeed they can make sure that the actions that are taken are appropriate for their organization. And so we work very, very closely with the clients in terms of that pre-breach activity, and then, of course, very closely with the client in that post-breach activity. But what's really critical post-breach is that the sooner you find something, time is king, right? The sooner you find something, the sooner you notify, the sooner you take action, the smaller the impact of that. And so that's really where Fortra's AlertLogic delivers incredible value to an organization.
How does it support mid-sized companies across diverse industries, tackling challenges like visibility gaps and resource limitations?
If you look at this MDR space, if you look at the market and how it's evolving, how it's growing, it's got an incredible compound annual growth rate predicted by the analysts. And most of that is being driven by the early adoption that occurred through the mid-market. It's really interesting to explore why the mid-market in particular was the early adopter and has driven this growth for this particular deliverable. And I think the answer is that if you look at very large enterprise, they have the resourcing that's available. They have the resourcing that can service the creation of 24/7 security operations center. They have the resourcing that allows an organization to build out, find the people, resource the landscape, buy the threat intelligence feeds, buy all of the tooling that's required, and then be able to invest in the ongoing evolution of that. Below large enterprise, most organizations, I think, are recognizing that when they started out in business, they didn't anticipate this cost for security operations. They didn't anticipate the cost growing in the way it's grown because of the sophistication of the adversary, the requirement to run so many tools, the requirement to bring those tools together, stitch the findings of those tools in a way which actually produces compelling results. They had little awareness that the signal to noise ratio was going to be so poor. They didn't know that finding and retaining the people was going to be such a big challenge. And so in that mid-market, I think they recognized that, if we pivot back to the first question, they want to be a law firm, they want to be a construction company, they want to be a manufacturing company, don't want to be a cybersecurity operations center. And so that's really, I think, what's driven the fact that if they add up the costs of acquiring the people, acquiring the tools, having a rotation to provide 24/7 coverage, the cost is so much more compelling by simply outsourcing that to an organization that's already doing that at scale. And so I think that's why the mid-market in particular has been the early adopters and really driven a lot of the growth in this particular sector.
What outcomes does Fortra MDR prioritize for its target market, balancing IT maturity levels and security needs?
Every customer is unique, right? Every customer has a different stack. Every customer is at a different point on their maturity journey. So it's very important that as a supplier that we add value to that organization across the spectrum of wherever their starting point is and help them move towards their goal of increased maturity and increased security. So the outcomes is a really important point. So Fortra and Fortra's Alert Logic are very focused on outcomes. And so those outcomes, again, we can revert back to the question that you asked around the pre and post breach activities. So before a breach, we want the outcomes to be very tangible in terms of elevating the security posture based upon identifying vulnerabilities, based upon employing strategies like file integrity monitoring, hardening their environment, making sure that they are as resistant to attack as is possible based upon the stack that they've got, or indeed the technology that we can bring as part of the service. The post-breach deliverable is, of course, very much about making sure that we find something bad as quickly as possible and that the organization then has a window of opportunity to take action before significant damage is done. And so there's a concept in the industry which most of the partners, I'm sure, will be familiar with, called the cyber kill chain. It was a great piece of work that was done by Lockheed Martin following a breach event that they experienced. And it details the life cycle of an attack. And of course, the key thing is to shift as far left as possible. Yeah, so we know that the attack consists of initial reconnaissance, the establishment of command and control, the credential harvesting, the privilege escalation, the further reconnaissance, lateral movement, all of that good stuff. And the key thing is for any service provider is to be as far left as possible. And I think we do an incredible job of identifying the bad early, providing notification with the industry-leading SLA, and then helping organizations isolate the offending landscape, the offending infrastructure, or taking appropriate compensating action to make sure that there is a limit on the impact of that breach event. And that's really the outcome that if you talk to most CISOs, you talk to most CIOs, you talk to most board members, that they're really looking for is to know that they're effectively transferring that risk to a provider who's going to really give them the air cover in that moment of crisis.
How does Fortra's NDR assist stakeholders in achieving security objectives and compliance goals?
Compliance is a really interesting one, and there's a big debate in the industry about whether good compliance drives good security or whether good security drives good compliance. It's a hotly debated topic. I think the reality is that compliance exists because the regulators need a way to ensure that the regulated entities are taking the appropriate steps to have an appropriate security posture for their customer base, typically consumers and financial industry and those kind of things. So compliance is really important for a lot of organizations, and especially in the consideration in security. And so the great news is that Fortra's Alert Logic can help organizations achieve their compliance goals at the same time as achieving, what I would describe as optimal security posture as well. And those two things, as I've alluded to, don't necessarily go hand in hand. And so, one of the reasons, for example, that a great deal of partners and indeed end users choose Fortra's Alert Logic is our capability in the financial services space, especially around payment card. So lots of changes coming in PCI DSS 4.0, and having a partner like Fortra's Alert Logic able to evolve with the changing compliance landscape and still deliver that value to your customer base is really important for a partner. So I would say that we're in very good shape in that respect. It's not only PCI DSS, but there's lots of considerations in terms of compliance around data residency, for example, data sovereignty, and data privacy as well, that all factor into the way in which we deliver the service and make sure that customers are comfortable with the way in which we're helping them achieve their optimal security posture.
That brings us to segment 3, partnering for success with Fortra. What advantages does Fortra's Alert Logic MDR service offer partners in terms of intelligence driven by data and human expertise?
By partnering with Fortra, the bigger Fortra, as well as specifically with Fortra's Alert Logic, we bring a great advantage to our partners and to their customer base. For those in the audience who aren't familiar with Fortra, so we've acquired Alert Logic and the deliverable of the managed detection and response, and we also do managed web application firewall as part of that as well. But we also have a significant number of other businesses, and we have businesses in robotic process automation, we have businesses in managed and secure file transfer, we have businesses in email security, a very big email security business, and all of these tools feed into a capability that we have at Fortra, which is called the Threat Brain. And the way in which we drive integration actually across the portfolio is through threat intelligence. And so by choosing Fortra's Alert Logic for an MDR deliverable, actually what the client is ended up receiving is the combined power of all of those deployed technologies across all of the Fortra customer base in terms of the generated indicators of compromise and so on. And one of our businesses in the email space is called Fish Labs. And Fish Labs is another managed service, as it happens, but it's all about the generation of threat intelligence and helping organizations with regard to credential theft and protecting their brand around that side of things. And so all of that capability is brought to bear in terms of the indicators of compromise, feeding into the Fortra Threat Brain, which is leveraged by the Alert Logic Security Operations Center that's then delivered to our clients. I guess the point I'm trying to get to is that the threat intelligence is really important to Fortra, a key way in which we deliver value to our clients in the managed security operations space. And the reason that it's a key point is because we've got all of these clients, literally thousands and thousands of clients across all of our portfolio, effectively generating anonymized indicators, which are then brought to bear for the benefit of the security posture of our managed service clients. It's a very, very compelling deliverable.
In what ways does it bring value to partners by providing customized incident response plans and individualized attention?
The core deliverable from Fortra's Alert Logic is the detection and then the degree of automated response depending on the client appetite, and we have various different components that we can bring to bear there. The reality is that every organization that experiences a breach event requires support, and that support can be in the context of incident response type activity, and it will be unique to every single client. And so what we tend to do is on a monthly basis do service reviews with the client. We do those with our partners as well included. So the partner is very familiar with the way in which the service is evolving, very familiar with the way in which we're making recommendations on architectural changes and configuration changes and so on. All very collaborative with the partner, with the end user. And that presents a huge amount of services opportunity for the partner. But then at that critical moment of crisis, where the client knows that we found something which is bad in their environment and they need to mobilize, who do they come to at that point? They come to their trusted partner with the services that they've got as their wraparound. And it is a really brilliant 1 + 1 + 1 equals more than 3 in that landscape. Again, it's a key differentiation of Fortra's Alert Logic in this MDR space. We're not taking those incident response services. We want our partners to benefit and optimize their margin profile in the way in which they deliver that as part of the overall proposition to a client.
What guidance do you offer to partners deliberating between collaborating with Fortra or handling it independently?
At some point in the past, there was a school of thought, which is we'll just go and start our own service. And the reality of that for a lot of organizations was that they pursued, should we say, a legacy approach to that model. And typically it was more of an MSSP style deliverable, which was, okay, let's take these components from the client's environment. Let's manage those for the client. But it's very, very challenging. And the reason it's challenging is because every client is unique. Every client has chosen a different technology stack. It becomes incredibly difficult to deliver a consistent outcome. Additionally, for the same reasons that we talked about from a mid-market perspective, why are clients choosing these outsourced services, these managed SOC services, these MDR services? It's because it's extremely difficult to find the people. It's extremely difficult to train and retain those people. There's a constant requirement for evolving threat intelligence. There is also the requirement that where the customer doesn't have their various different components, do you provide those components? Do you ask the client to pay for those components? And so when you add all of that in together, the quickest time to value for an organization that's thinking about doing it themselves is when you add all that stuff up. It's like, let's just partner with Fortra's Alert Logic. Let's go to market with those guys. We can do the heavy lift. You can make the optimal margin profile on it. And we've got an out-of-the-box deliverable effectively because we've had all of that experience in the last 10 years of delivering against those challenges. So the reality is it's a very, very high cost of entry. But it doesn't have to be, because you can simply partner with us and go to market with your own MDR, which is under the hood Fortra's Alert Logic.
Finally, where can we learn more?
As if by magic, there's the link that appears on your screen. So please visit the link. In doing so, you get exposed to a wealth of information, but also the opportunity then to interact with the Alert Logic team and to ask questions and to set up a further dialogue with us. We welcome the opportunity to talk to you, to answer any questions that you might have. We're incredibly channel-centric. We know that you will have lots of questions. We're prepared to field those questions and to provide references of other partners who've been on the journey with us. If you're thinking about a managed detection and a response partnership, then you don't need to look any further. We are specifically built and designed around a channel model, and we've got the best experience, we've got the best SLA, and we've got incredible references. You don't need to look any further than Fortra's Alert Logic.
Darren, thank you so much for joining me here today.
Appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity to speak.
And thank you at home for watching. For the channel company, I'm Kenna Johnson.